Observer came out yesterday, and a lot of people are losing their damn minds over the Rebellion pay-per-view buys, especially because there's like a discrepancy between the numbers. So, and then some people have been telling me that Dave Meltzer is lying to attack TNA. Like Dave Meltzer has got this agenda out against TNA, which is just horribly untrue. Like, just because it's news that you don't like, that doesn't mean it's a lie. It might end up being wrong, but it's not a lie. I can confirm it's not a lie. I don't know Dave, but he and I have enough mutual friends to know that he's not going to lie about that. He might end up being wrong, and I think that's a possibility here because these numbers are a little bit wonky. So basically, what he said is that Rebellion had a 89% drop from Hard to Kill. And the aggregators are not understanding what's going on here. And Dave didn't do a very good job of explaining it. And if I had an opportunity to talk to Dave, I was like, hey, when you don't explain these things thoroughly, right? And TNA is such like low on his priority list, he doesn't really devote too much time to it because his like they actually now have a TNA podcast. Not very good. They have a TNA podcast now, but they don't devote much time to TNA. It's because not many of their subscribers actually care. And I get that. Like JD and I don't devote a ton of time to WWE. Like we don't recap their shows. Like I recapped WrestleMania, and I think I recapped Royal Rumble, but that's been like about it. So I get, and it's because our audience just doesn't care about the blow by blow for WWE. So we only cover like the big stories, but I'm not covering title changes and all that stuff. So I get it. His subscriber base doesn't care, so he doesn't devote too much time. But what happens is because he's the top news guy in the business, when you don't explain things thoroughly, the aggregators go crazy, and then that makes it seem like you got an agenda, which I know to not be true. I know he does not. So here's what happened. So they said that the television buys. Okay, so get your mind away from streaming. Okay, streaming numbers have not come in yet. So this is television buys, and this is an not aggregated, but this is a compilation number essentially, where like an estimate number from different systems, right? And he doesn't have every system. It's some places are going to be up and down and yada yada yada, but he's got enough numbers where he feels like he can make an estimate, right? So this is an estimated number: 500 television pay-per-view buys. Now, when he does the television numbers, streaming buys are typically about 3 times that. So if you look at it, television pay-per-view buys 500, we're probably looking at around anywhere from 12 to 1800 buys overall. Okay, at this point. So he said that the television numbers are down 89% from Hard to Kill. Now, people were like, Hard to Kill was 66,000. That math doesn't add up. That's because you guys are looking at the wrong number. He's talking television pay-per-view buys. So television pay-per-view buys for Hard to Kill were 22,000, 22,400, something like that. That number also doesn't add up. And why doesn't it add up? Because Dave didn't explain it very well. The 500 number is down from the original number, the first week number that he had for Hard to Kill for pay-per-view buys, which was 3,400. If you do that math, 500 buys, down from 3,400, that's 89%. He didn't explain that, and so now everybody's going crazy. So everybody thinks that he's lying because the math is off. It's not off. He just didn't give you the right denominator. And so that's where we're at. Now, what happened with Hard to Kill was they had 3,400 television pay-per-view buys initially, which was roughly about anywhere from 9 to 12,000, give or take, including streaming, right? Initially, and then over time they had more and more buys over time because of the buzz that was coming out of the show. Could we see that here with Rebellion? I think that we'll probably get up there in buys. I do. Not anywhere near not anywhere near what they had for Hard to Kill. Because I told you guys 2 weeks ago that Rebellion was ice cold heading in, or yeah, TNA was ice cold heading into Rebellion. I knew this show was gonna die. Not only was the product just ice cold, they had no buzz, none whatsoever. None of the matches were all that interesting. We knew that they were going to be good, but everybody has good matches, so who cares? But none of the storylines, except for me personally, I liked the Josh and Hammerstone story. I didn't really care for any of the other storylines. I just didn't. I thought they were just like okay, but none of it was like must see TV. So it was ice cold. Not only that, AEW had Collision and they had Rampage, so they did a full 3-hour block, counter programming, and unintentional, but it looks like it's intentional. I'm not, they had to move Rampage due to NBA, and that was not helpful to TNA. And a lot of people think that was intentional. I don't know. I don't know if Tony had the option to move it like up or down on Friday, or move it earlier in the day on Saturday, or move it to another day or whatever. But he chose right up against Rebellion, which is a typical thing because Battle of the Belts has been going up against most Big Four pay-per-views, and then now Rampage went up against the Big Four, including Collision. But look, Collision is every Saturday at that time anyway, so TNA is always going to go up against Collision. So and Hard to Kill went up against Collision, and look what Hard to Kill did. So I don't want to sit here and say that because there was a free 3 hours on TNT that had a significant effect on the numbers. I think the biggest impact on the numbers was that TNA was cold heading into the weekend. They didn't do enough to get people to buy. I don't like making a ton of excuses. Okay, that's just how I live, and you guys know that about me. So why was the pay-per-view down 89% from the initial buys? Because they didn't do a good enough job. They're not good enough to be bought. They didn't go out there and hustle and get people to spend their money. That's why. And that's the only way you can look at it. That's the only healthy way to look at it. If you just sit there and throw excuses at failure, you're constantly going to be a failure. You got to diagnose why you weren't good enough and get to the bottom of it, and then go get better. Right? If you just sit there and whine and complain, it's like, oh, AEW was already scheduled for that time. You knew they're scheduled for Saturday at 8 every week, and then your pay-per-view is going to go up against it. So you know that you got an uphill already. You got to go and get beat. Go ahead and overcome that, like you did for Hard to Kill. Why was Hard to Kill so big? Well, they had a lot of late buys. But initially, that was one of the better numbers, 3,400 television. So you're probably looking at 10 to 12,000, right? Watching live. That's pretty good, right? Going up against Collision. So, and I think they had a Battle of the Belts too. But I do think that we'll get that number is going to jump up probably significantly, but still not going to get anywhere close to Hard to Kill. It's just not. They just don't have the buzz. So, and then the other reason why the number was down significantly, number one reason, they're not good enough to get people to buy their pay-per-views. They're just not. Second, counter programming. Third, the next day was Dynasty, and Dynasty had all the buzz in the world. But Dynasty was still down. Dynasty was down pretty significantly too. I think I don't remember what the percentage was. I didn't really look up those numbers because this isn't a AEW podcast. But they were also down, and I'm sure Rebellion being that weekend was not helpful to them. Although Rebellion did not get that many buys, so it couldn't have been too much of a ding. But yeah, so I mean that's tough. That's tough. But here's why it gets confused. It's previous. So this is an aggregated site, by the way. So it says, it's previously reported the pay-per-view buys for TNA Hard to Kill set a company record with around 66,000 on TV and streaming. However, TNA Rebellion appears to have performed significantly worse. Wrestling Observer reports that Rebellion had around 500 television pay-per-view buys, which is down 83.9% from Hard to Kill. Those numbers don't add up. That's just not true, right? That's not what happened. And I think, as someone that uses Dave's news a lot for these podcasts and for my main podcast, I think it's important to try to decipher what he says. But if you have to decipher what somebody says, they're not doing a good enough job either. Dave's got to be better than that. If and it's and it, they, and I don't know if he addressed this on his latest podcast with Garrett. They probably didn't even cover TNA. I'm gonna listen to it later today when I go for a run. Um, but if what you're saying is that everybody else is stupid, well, that's not good either. It's like a teacher. Like, if none of your kids are passing, your excuse can't be they're all dumb. No, you're not doing a good enough job teaching. So if people aren't understanding what you're writing, it's not because they're dumb. It's because you're not doing a good enough job explaining yourself. And so you got to just be better, right? And I think he knows that. So I hope he knows that. So he's got to be better, because he created a mass hysteria, and people are the typical, and they're most of them are like AEW diehard fans, right? And I see them, and I am on a website with some of them. TNA LOL, they're dying. Oh, they're such failures. Scott Demore. Oh, this is all because Scott. No, no. There's a lot that went into this. There's a lot of reasons, and you know what they're gonna do? They're just gonna keep going, right? And then they'll do something great, and you guys won't talk about it, and then they'll fuck up, and you guys will just not stop talking about it for like 2 days, because that's just the type of people that you are.